Hello and welcome to the Business of Storytelling from Moore's Law Media and our very generous sponsor Vimeo. You've heard of them, I'm sure. They are the platform with everything you need to make, manage and share brilliant videos at vimeo.com. In this podcast, I, Neil Moore, talk to the leading creators and commissioners of stories to find out what they know that we don't, how they do it so well, what we can learn from them to tell better stories ourselves. And today I'm joined by Zat. Just Zat. He is the editor of The Peak in Singapore, a luxury business lifestyle magazine. But what's interesting, I think, is that he has come from digital into print, which is kind of the reverse of the typical business journey. So, Zat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about your journey.
Let's talk about my journey.
Before you tell us what The Peak is, tell us how you got to The Peak in brief terms.
I guess in brief terms, I would say that I came into this world of digital content creation due to necessity because I wanted to find an identity for myself, and I wanted to and I had to answer this question of what is my value to the world. And for me, the value that I have to the world is storytelling. I want to say that this is not the truth, but it is. I know it sounds very cliche.
I'm fine because it's totally on brand for the podcast.
Yeah,
it's fine.
But I tell people the origin story happened when I was sitting at an armchair at Bishan National Library, at a corner on an armchair, and I asked myself, what do you want to do with your life? So I thought, I'm going to be a storyteller.
You had your ikigai moment.
Yes.
What can I do? What can I be paid for?
Yeah.
What value can I have? That's
Correct.
great.
Yeah.
So I know that throughout your whole career, you've written and created for multiple publications, including Rice Media, who we're going to talk to as well.
Yeah.
Your friend, former boss, Ilyas. But right now you're at The Peak, and I'm interested in that for two reasons. One, because of the type of publication it is, which I'll get you to describe.
Yep.
Two, because so you've had quite an unusual journey in that you're going what we consider sort of reverse engineering. You're going from digital to print. Why is that and how is that?
The nature of digital, is about immediacy. It is about being the first. It is about being quick, and it is about being super on time. There is I feel like there is an art to print, right? The romanticism to print, right? That most people in digital have not discovered. The first 2 months, that I was in, I was so enamored. I was so enamored by the beauty and the craft of print, to the point where I had my supervisors tell me, I feel that you are a little bit too involved with the process, And the reason why they hired me is because they wanted the publication to be a little bit more digital savvy. Right. So when they see that, I am slowly getting into the romanticization of print, they feel like we just need to tell you that we can see it happening because we see it happening with people all the time. And
there's still nothing like the thrill of seeing a name in print. There really isn't.
People don't understand. The stories that come to me, come to me in a Google Doc. Okay.
Yep.
I read Google Docs at night, in the bus, on the train. I always tell people I don't take Grab because I need that time from my house to the place where I'm going to read through all the stories that have been submitted. Okay, because I don't like to read on the computer. I like to read on my phone. So to see the story, the Google Docs, come to life from Arial size 11, paragraph spacing 1.15 to this beautiful page on the magazine, it is impressive. The first time I saw it, I told myself, my God, these digital people really need to understand, they really need to see this for themselves. Of course, I believe in the world is going towards digital. I do believe that. But I think slowly, we're looking at appreciating the print process or the print product a little bit more like how we love vinyls.
Yeah, and if most vinyl people have a Spotify account and they have CDs and whatever, I think the problem is particularly within the marketing and advertising industry where I work and where podcast is sort of aimed at, is that we love to pronounce things as being dead. Print is dead. Twitter's dead. This is dead. It's not. It just becomes maybe a smaller part of the arsenal, but it could become less volume, less quantity.
Yeah.
It could be more highly valued.
Yes.
You know, so you're seeing, for example, right now, revival in cloth-bound copies of classic books that people love to have on their shelves as objects and things like that. And I think one of the things, I mean, we should have brought a copy with us really, but the Peak, it's a very weighty, I'm going to sound really romantic now, but the paper stock is gorgeous.
Yeah.
You have the matte finish on the front, which is a very distinctive thing for the Peak. You know, your serif font at the top. It is a nice object to hold. It is, you know, it's a coffee table tome. You want it out. You want people to see it. So there is a romance to that, and I think it has value for that. And one of the stories I tell my clients when they say everything's digital now, I say, okay, next time you go on a business trip, instead of texting your partner at home, write them a letter on hotel stationery, send it to them, and then tell me what the reaction was like when you got home.
Yeah.
And it's greater because the value is greater and the scarcity makes it greater. But you're also there to bring them digital. So they've acknowledged it's not an all or nothing scenario. So I'm going to get to what you're doing different in a minute.
Okay.
The first thing I need to ask you in definitive terms is, what is the role of storytelling in your job and your business?
Primarily, the stories that I do for the Peak focuses a lot, especially for the business side, right? I want to bring back the focus and the importance to business topics, business issues. So when I first came in, I immediately instituted a theme. So every month there has to be a theme, the business of something. So this, for instance, is the business of storytelling, right? So I've done the business of AI, the business of health and tech, the business of family offices, the business of social media. And it just so happens that every time I come up with this theme, something happens in the world that aligns with the theme that I have. I'm not going to jinx it and say, "Ooh, I'm so lucky." It happens.
Can use instincts.
Yeah, it's just like for instance, when I did the business of AI, I was not expecting the world in the month of July to suddenly be talking about AI so much, and so when I came up with that topic, everything just fell into place very beautifully. I was blessed. But beyond that, I think I wanted to make sure that the cover personality is a subject matter expert. Somebody who really knows what they're talking about. Someone who is a bit awkward to be in front of the camera because they are subject matter experts. They are not familiar.
They're not professional spokespersons.
Correct. They're not familiar with all this wearing the beautiful clothes, the grooming. They are more comfortable behind the scenes.
And that makes them more interesting to you?
Yeah, it does. Because sometimes when I ask them, right, can you tell me a little bit more about what you do? Because I don't understand what you do based on the website. It's very blur. It's very I don't understand what it means, right?
Well, these industries have their own language.
Yes.
Completely. You know?
Yeah. So when I spoke to, for instance, Simranjit Singh, who is the CEO of a health company that does painless cancer detection. Right?
Okay, that seems valuable.
Yeah, before he sat at the table in front of me, I actually have a vague idea of what he does. But when he sat down and he explained the whole process, the whole painless, invasive, non-invasive biopsies, right? The first thing I said to him was, so what you pioneer is empathetic cancer testing. And he said, yes, because people who are older cannot do the invasive biopsies because they are so old, right? So the technology that he has created is great for people who are frail or people who cannot possibly take the physical biopsies. So I thought, okay, that's very interesting. So to go back to your question about what sort of stories I create and what is the meaningfulness of the stories that I create, for me, the stories on the Peak has to be informative. It has to talk about the subject in a very factual and informational way. But I also want my CEOs, my founders, to tell me a little bit more about their journey that not many people have actually asked them. the nature of CEOs is that most people will not ask them this kind of very personal, vulnerable questions like, what was your childhood like growing up and how has this affected the things that you do today? So when I ask CEOs that, they get a bit like, why are you asking me this? You know, and I said, because
people are interested.
yes, I am interested.
Yeah.
You know, and I need to know that we are on the same page. I am not here to just ask you about the work that you do. If I want to do that, especially for my cover story, if I want to do that, I can send in an email.
Yeah.
I send in an email Q&A interview. I'll send it to your corp comms, and your corp comms will answer all this beautifully, and it's beautifully phrased. But I want to hear from you because I want to see how you respond to my answers. I want to talk about how your eyes light up. I want to talk about how your body language changes when I ask you a difficult question. These are the things that I want. So for me, the storytelling aspect of interviewing CEOs, right, is something that I'm really, really focused on. And it's not just CEOs, it's also about the other profiles that we have in the magazine. And recently, I just instituted the fact that I want all the stories to have a POV, a strong POV. If not, then why are we writing that story?
So give me an example. I mean, AI is quite a controversial topic right now. So what would be the Peak's point of view on that? Or is it the individual journalist's point of view?
So for me, the thing that most people are not talking about at that point in time was the ethics of AI. So the whole point of AI at that point in time was more about how amazing ChatGPT is, how amazing large language models are, but nobody is talking about the principles and the morals of AI. So when I interviewed Ying Xiaowei, who is the chief scientist of NCS, right, I point blank asked him, do you worry that one day AI will take over the world? And he sighed and it's a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah, but that's what I want, right? So that is how I see storytelling, especially when it comes to CEOs. And there have been several after that. And for instance, so Revo is a digital family office and they are concerned with digital assets for family offices,
Okay.
right? So I was interviewing the CIO and she was so fluent about the topic, but something was missing. The vulnerability was missing. So I was like, oh my God, I need to get this. What is it that I'm missing? So I waited all the way until she booked her car home. That's when she said, you know, Zat, I once went to a conference at SMU, right? And someone asked me, where is the coffee or where is the beverage? They thought that I was the staff of the hotel. I'm like, what? They say, yeah, there's not enough women in this space. It's like, okay, I'm going
I
off.
hadn't made that connection. Yeah. good
Yeah, then
point.
I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. It's like, okay, bye, I'm going off already. So I'm like, okay, so that is what I started my story with. So,
But I want to stop there because the idea of this podcast is to try and help, professional marketers and communicators tell better stories.
Yes.
Because I feel like that sort of peaked as a point of interest a couple of years ago with content marketing, and people have brushed past it because it's not always the easiest thing to do. Would it be fair to say, what I'm taking from you is that everybody has a story, but they're not always just going to relinquish it to you. You got to
course.
dig, you got to poke, you got to prod, you got to pry, you got to find out. And when we talk about telling customer stories or telling employee stories or whatever, there's two aspects. One, to get the true story, you got to try a bit harder. It's not just going to present itself to you. But two, that's what people actually find interesting.
Yeah.
Everything else is an announcement. It's a press release. It's not a story. A story, we got to dig a bit. Is that fair to say?
yes, because I believe in this thing that Brené Brown said once. And she said that when I sit down and speak with someone, I am demanding from them a vulnerability. And if I, as an interviewer, if I am not willing to give that vulnerability to them, I can never get anything from them beyond what has been given.
Okay, so this speaks to technique. So let's
Yeah.
say, for example, I'm a marketer or whatever, and I'm trying to tell a great customer story, a great employee story, and I want that vulnerability.
Yeah.
You're a professional interviewer.
Yeah.
Which is a little intimidating for me, I'll be honest with you, but you're a professional at this. What are the techniques you can do to try and get that vulnerability, not in an exploitative way, but just to get a really good, authentic story?
I think it's about giving questions or asking questions that have breadth, but also have depth. So my questions for my interviewees are never long. I've never asked long questions. It has always been, where do you study?
Okay.
Then they'll be like, oh, I study at Hwa Chong. So I see. Do you think your success came because you came from a privileged school? Then they'll be like, I see where this is going. So
You're
always,
connecting the dots.
yes,
So you need to have some knowledge. You need
Yes.
some background. You're connecting the dots, and then it's all the little follow-ups.
Yeah.
I think often people in the corporate sphere, I mean, they're busy, right? And for many people, the process of finding and telling a good story just seems a bit too, takes too long. It's too much work and whatever. And so they ask a question. I mean, I've seen a lot of people trying to interview people purely over email, and they want a perfectly fully formed answer to come out.
yeah.
But actually, it's about asking lots of little questions to build that answer up, because no one's going to sort of serve it to you on a plate.
But you see, right, that's the thing with email interviews, which some marketers do, right? They do email
Well, some
interviews.
journalists do.
Yeah,
I mean,
they do.
sometimes it can't be avoided. But
So for instance, for my power list, which
so some context. So this is the latest issue. You've done
Yeah.
your 2023
power list
power list for Singapore alone.
for Singapore alone, yeah. So the
Okay.
theme that I gave was quiet power, which was the hardest thing to come up with.
Because those people aren't announcing themselves and putting out press releases.
And I have had rejections because they tell me, and these are great CEOs and great founders, they will email me back and say, I don't think I'm deserving to be on this list. Thanks, bye. I'm like, but you have done so much.
But even I had a bit of that putting this podcast together, asking people, I go, you're really impressive. I think you're amazing.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm the right person.
Yeah. Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah,
But it's okay. So I got through that. So for instance, this power list, right? I was very insistent to all my 5 writers. I tell them, you cannot meet the CEOs for a chat because they don't have time.
No.
They just don't have the time. So you have to ask them email. You have to give the questions in an email interview. But when you craft the questions for the email interview, you must be able to take that questions and the responses and make it into a narrative. So there's the externality that you have researched, that you have thought of. How are you going to take that externality and put it together with these responses that they gave you such that the story becomes cohesive and whole? So start from there, then create the questions. And it succeeded. All the stories came out correctly because they start with that premise in mind instead of let me see what the answers are and how I can make this into a narrative. So it starts with I'm going to create a narrative from this. What questions can I ask and what answers would be good for it?
Okay. So we have to go in there with some idea of what we want to achieve.
Yes.
Which is something that marketers and communicators should really know. That's
Yeah.
how they always start with a sort of strategic objective in
Yeah.
mind and work back from there.
But the problem is this. The problem with marketers is this. They are always concerned with selling.
Well, that's a difficult one because that is the primary job, but one doesn't always sell on the first interaction. One must entice to earn the opportunity to pitch. I mean, that's the way I look at it, being just purely a sales, a small businessman who pitches people all the time, is I have to entice you in and sort of earn the right to pitch you my wares. And that is by offering great content, whether it's this podcast, which I hope that's part of the job of this podcast, is show people, hey, I know about storytelling, I'm connected to storytellers. Or on LinkedIn, I say to people all the time, before you ask, give. Give to get, not purely to get, but offer advice, offer ideas, offer insight, and earn the right to then pitch. So I think, would you agree with that? Is that an approach?
Most times, right, when I get pitches from marketers who say like, oh, we have this product, we want you to carry the story. Would you be interested? The ones that I pick, right, are not the ones that are simply informational. It has to have some sort of emotional aspect to it that I don't immediately get. But when I read through, I'm like, okay. Then I'll send it to my writer and say, I think this will make for a very interesting story. Let's go for this angle, see whether you can get anything more. So they will go and they will investigate, then the story comes out. But if it's just something that is purely informational, which is fine, because some stories are really purely informational, right?
Or there might be other publications that's right for. But,
Yes,
But what I don't want to
possibly.
do a masterclass in sort of pitching journalists and PRs. What I'm trying to work out is when a marketer wants to tell their own story, and maybe it's a people-centric story, what I'm getting is that, what is your objective in telling that story? How do you angle the questions towards it? Don't let them sort of get away with the first answer. You know, dig a little bit,
Yep.
find out. And if you want them to be vulnerable yourself. This is great. This is all very tangible, actionable stuff. My next question for you is, obviously, when you've got, I've seen the peak, when you've got a couple of thousand words to, you know, go on about your, and give your impressions of them and whatever, that's great. But part of your job has been to take the peak and make it function in a digital realm where we don't have that space.
Yeah.
So how do you square that circle? How are you delivering this kind of long form, relaxed, laid back content into what platforms do you use currently
For
for the peak? What other platforms is it now on apart from publication?
Instagram, Facebook, of course, and we also have Telegram. Yeah, but basically just Instagram and Facebook.
Okay.
LinkedIn is our
Well,
new thing.
for C-suite and business, I understand. So what do you do? Do you take your stories and just sort of promote them on those platforms, or do you turn them into something else? I mean, they're visual, you're writing. I'm interested in how you take one of those beautiful, luxurious stories in gorgeous print, and what do you do with the other digital platforms to help that story?
Okay, so this is the work that is in progress.
Okay.
My principle is that every social media platform has a different audience, and therefore it needs a different content direction.
Okay.
So your story has to be big enough that it can be parsed for each of the different platforms. For instance, if I am going to put this story on Instagram, a story about a CEO on Instagram, I'm not going to put all 1,200 words on it, right? I will pick maybe 5 things that are very interesting for my Instagram audience. So if my Instagram audience are the kind who value social justice, who value principles and morals, right? Then if I have a story about a CEO who created a technology that is empathetic towards cancer testing, biopsies, I will probably use that as the main draw.
So rather than it being about the person, for a different platform, the angle becomes
different.
the technology or the products or whatever.
Yeah, and that is something that most people don't realize needs to happen. And I say this, right, because I see a lot of copy and paste. So whenever a news publication comes out with a story, they will simply just copy and paste the same thing across all the platforms and expect everything to work. But the nature of each social media platform is this, and the truth is this: if you are on Instagram, you will never leave the app. So even if I put a slide there that says click to read more in the link in bio, nobody does that. It is not natural behavior.
Now that's very interesting because for a lot of clients, brands, whatever, they see the job of social is to drive traffic to the core asset, which would be the website or the product landing page or whatever.
Yeah.
You disagree?
No.
So you're on Instagram to build an audience on Instagram.
On Instagram.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
How does that contribute to the business?
So, if I can build a separate audience on Instagram that is separate from my website, right? Then I already have 2 kinds of audience.
So you're seeing your Instagram as a whole other asset.
A whole other asset, yes. Right. Whole other audience, a whole other content direction, completely different. And in one day, I have a TikTok channel for the peak. The people who are watching the peak videos about CEOs and the current state of work, they are not the same people on Instagram. So they probably would have discovered the peak through TikTok. They will not know, unless they visit the website, what the peak is about. They only know that, the peak is talking to CEOs about the current state of work. That's what they know the peak to be.
But all of these audiences are potentially valuable to you.
Yes. Yeah, they are
just
all
building them in their separate locations.
Correct, yeah. So when we have a campaign or like a marketing campaign, right, we can actually tell these brands that this audience is like this audience is like this. It is a very old-fashioned way, right, to think that all roads lead back to the website.
Well, I think this has been one of the few ways that marketers have been able to justify their investment in these other platforms. But the idea that if you build your audience there and you tailor it for them there, why do they need to go back to the website? Is it just because you can measure it, or you
Yeah.
can boast about your dwell time, or whatever. I don't know.
Vanity metrics.
Well, yeah, but vanity metrics are big numbers, and everybody likes big numbers, right?
They are, but for me, right, I look at numbers as something that is very practical, right? I don't like to see numbers as just a value. I like to see numbers as a story and a relationship between each other. So, for instance, if Instagram, if this story it does very well on Instagram, but don't do that well on the website, what does that mean? If the story do very well on the website, but the page, the amount of time people spend on the website is very low, but the page views are very high, what does that mean?
Right.
It is not just about this story has 9,000 page views. That's all. So, what does this do? This answer does nothing. This number means nothing to me. I want to know the relationship between the numbers, right? And that starts with understanding and acknowledging that every social media platform is a unique entity on its own. Previously, perhaps, yes. Maybe 10 years ago, yes, you can say if you have an Instagram account, your goal is to drive the traffic back to the website. But right now, Instagram is flourishing. It is an entity on its own. Why are people not taking that and using it to their advantage?
Well, yeah, I suppose all the social media platforms are now building out their e-commerce offerings.
Yes.
So there's transactions that can happen within there without going anywhere else. I think, though, I mean, I remember working on publications at the sort of start of the internet, because I'm getting on a bit, and it was always about, yeah, driving people to the core asset and trying to get those figures up for that page. And the sort of vanity, we used to measure by circulation, right? And so your website numbers feel like your circulation figures, and that concept of it being your real estate and you own it. But I suppose these days, we can't afford to ignore any of these platforms, really.
Yeah.
How does the Peak as a brand is, as we said earlier, that the magazine's kind of a beautiful thing and it's very luxurious, it's very high level. How can one maintain that prestige on digital? Because digital's kind of, anyone can go on digital. The whole point of the Peak is that not everybody can produce a magazine of that craft and quality. Everybody's on digital. How do you maintain the quality in a digital space?
But it is like looking at a Fendi coat in store is a different experience from looking at it on a website. But they are both the same thing. So what I can do, the best that I can do, right, is to make sure that the story itself is luxurious, and in the sense that the content is great, there is a great angle, there is a great hook, and there is some sort of something difficult for the person or for the profile to get over. That for me represents luxuriness in terms of storytelling.
So what you're saying is, if I can paraphrase, is you can maintain the essence of your brand on social, not just through the platform and the production values, which may or may not be luxurious, but through the content and the angle that is unique to the Peak.
Yes.
So I'm thinking about this from the point of view of marketers and other brands, and how do they differentiate within the digital realm when all the platforms are the same and the trends kind of the same? And so this idea that your content and your angle is what differentiates you. I think that's a really useful thing for them to know. You mentioned just then as well about having something to get over in your story. So let's talk about what makes a great story for you and for the Peak. What do you look for? Obviously, sometimes you're offered a profile of someone and you don't know their story yet. So how do you turn a profile of someone who ostensibly is very successful, very smart, very rich? Where do you find the story within that person? Because here's the thing, really rich, successful, good-looking people can be very boring. Because life is good. So what do you look for? How do you turn that into a story?
This is such a great question because it is something that I am currently struggling with. Because
Good. I'm glad. That means we're all struggling with it, if you're struggling.
Because I am writing a story about a CEO that I felt like I didn't push enough. Because I don't want the CEO to be scared. CEOs, when they speak to me, right, they always start with, "I'm so nervous to speak to you."
Isn't it funny?
Yeah, and I'm like, why?
You think you run a company of thousands of people.
Yeah. I'm one person. No need to be scared of me. So, but yeah, I'm scared. I'm a bit nervous. So, okay, don't worry. Let's just take it easy. So I was not, when I was speaking to this CEO, I was not pushing the boundaries sufficiently, I feel. So
You don't think it was a PR strategy, do you?
I don't think so because they
I'm just being
they-
cynical.
Yeah, because they've never asked for the questions, you know. They
Oh, okay.
never
All right.
yeah,
Good,
so
good,
which
good.
is all great. And I keep telling them I'm not here for sensational journalism. I'm not here for controversies. I just want to tell the story that you have.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I think, again, for the clients need to understand, not that this is particularly about PR, but not every journalist is there to grill you. You know,
Yes.
understand the publication.
Yes.
There are some journalists who are, and that's their job. And I know you've done investigations in the
Yes.
past.
Yes.
But a profile is inherently friendly, but we need to make it interesting.
Yes. And the interest the interesting aspect comes from having something to get over. Something, what do you call it? I keep
With some sort of struggle.
some sort of struggle,
conflict,
yes.
or-
Yeah, some sort of hardship, right, that they need to get across. Something that they need to jump over to get to where they are now. So I'm always looking for that. So we'll be talking for 30 minutes, right? And I'm like, so what is it? What
Do
is
you
this?
find they're reluctant to talk about that? Because everybody wants to talk about their successes.
Correct.
Be it a company or an individual.
Yes.
No one wants to talk about not even their failures sometimes. It's not that they did something wrong, but maybe they're ashamed of their humble beginnings, or maybe they're, they have a disability they don't want to talk about, or whatever. But it's important they do. It's not a story if they
Yeah.
don't.
If not, then it just becomes a presentation of facts.
Good.
Which is like paragraph 1, presentation of facts 1, facts 2, facts 3, paragraph 2. It's always that, right? And I'm thinking, how do I make all this come together? I'll get it eventually. I think I am about to break that because I've been trying to write this piece for a week, and I find I find that I am empty. It's missing. Something is missing. Other people who look at it, they go like, oh, this is such a great story. But for me, editorially, something is missing. So I need to find out what it is. I don't know what it is yet. I'll get it.
Sometimes you need to work it. I think that's the other thing that I think brands and marketers could learn from publishers and channels is
Yeah.
that a lot of brands, they'll put all their eggs into one basket. They'll bet everything on this one story or this one video or this once a month blog they do.
Yeah.
Your average publication is producing 30, 40 stories a month. Let alone one a month. So, but yet you're still agonizing over each one.
Yeah.
Even though you have to produce so many. So
Because every story is important to me. I'm not just telling a story about the brand. I'm telling a story about a person. And that story will live on forever.
you have a responsibility.
Yes, and because my SEO skills is quite strong, so when I create the story, I create it with the SEO in mind. So whenever someone types the CEO's name, right, my story will come up. I ensure that my story will always come up.
So how do you manage that? Because one of the complaints I get from journalists who end up having to write for brands, I say having to write for brands, we call it going to the dark side, right? When we're in that field. They sort of say, look, they want me to tell a story, but they want it to be, work on SEO. It's like, what do you want, the story or the optimization? They see it as two conflicting things. How do you balance the left and the right?
I don't, because I come from a digital background. I came into the world, right, as a digital native. So I don't see things like that.
You don't see the conflict. It's always been that way.
Yes, for me, it's always been like that. You have to find a way. The story needs to sell, but for instance, right, when it comes to SEO keywords, right, one of the things that most people are a bit annoyed by, especially from my previous writers who have told me, right, they say it's so difficult to put in sufficient keywords inside the story, right? So I said,
sounds familiar.
if you are struggling to put enough keywords inside the story, right, what is your story about? If you're talking about a person, and you say that I cannot put enough SEO, I cannot put the keyword of the person's name inside the story, then what are you telling? What story are you telling?
That's a signal to you that the story's not focused on.
Yes. Or is it really about this person, or are you talking about something else? Have you veered so much off course, right, that instead of talking about this person, you're talking about other things? Should the SEO then be about those other things? So if the SEO is not about that particular product or that particular person you're talking about, right, then you have to ask yourself, what am I doing? What am I really talking about?
Yeah, I think it's quite a good measure of whether or not you're sort of on track for the story you want to tell.
And I know writers who have never written for digital before, right? Just based on that. So when I read the story, they don't talk about the thing that they're supposed to talk about sufficiently enough. So they just go on and on and on, right? But you don't see that keyword coming. And that keyword for me is not just a keyword. It is to anchor you and to make sure that you stay on track.
Yeah, so your keywords are almost, that's the way you stay on theme.
Yes.
You know, your theme can sort of come out through the keywords that you use. Yeah, I like that.
So if, for instance, right, if I'm talking to a CEO who does, for instance, the empathetic biopsy testing, right? My SEO could be about the CEO, but do I want it to be about the CEO? Perhaps not, because for me, maybe the CEO is not as crucial as the fact that this is a biopsy story.
Would you angle it, would you say, for example, would you make it about the CEO in the print, but then angle it different for online to make it more about the cancer treatment?
When it comes to that, right, when I present the story on print, it would definitely be about the CEO because of the images, because of the quotes. But online, you see words. The images are there, but the images are there simply to break up the text. Let's be real. It is just to break up the text. And maybe to inform, maybe there's a YouTube video to inform. But you don't see the CEO himself in the story, but you see the result of the work that he does. So as long as the story can attend to the digital portion of the publication and it makes sense, then the moment it goes into print with all the beautiful pictures that comes in, right, both will work.
So as a marketer or content creator, commercial content creator, my takeaway from this is that journalists often talk about finding an angle for a story. But actually, if we want to, we can put the same story across multiple platforms, but we need to find angles.
Yes.
Multiple angles, depending on the platform we're going for and understanding that platform.
Yes.
So when you go into tell a story or capture a story from somewhere, how aware are you going in of how many angles you need and how many things you need to get out? I mean, I'm just trying to think about how much you can keep in your head in the pursuit of one story without feeling overwhelmed.
I think with what we do on The Peak, right, because it is such a different publication, that process is a little bit easier.
Because it's quite a distinctive editorial
direction,
Yeah.
right? But in my previous publication, it becomes harder. Because in my previous publication, I always start the story with the output in mind.
So this is Rice Media, your
This is
previous
Rice Media,
publication.
yes. So it is always about that. And I feel like that is something that all publications should be doing. You take a really big story and you ask yourself, how do I parse this for all the platforms that I have? Is my story big enough for all the platforms that I have? If it's not big enough, maybe don't put it on all the platforms, maybe put it on one or two. So for The Peak, how I do it, right, for the different platforms, of course, for Instagram, it's a bit more visual. For Facebook, it is more textual. But for LinkedIn, that is a whole different thing altogether. So that's where I come in with a different strategy. So what I always put on LinkedIn, right, is the conversation I have with the profile before the photo shoot or after the photo shoot, because that is when they are the most relaxed.
Oh, so this is the behind the scenes.
The behind the scenes, yes. For my previous publication, my LinkedIn post caption is about how we got to the story. It is post story. But for The Peak, the LinkedIn caption is pre-story. So I will say things like, when I met this person, I was not sure that this was the story I had in mind.
And are you posting as yourself or as The Peak?
As myself.
Right.
Because on LinkedIn, brands is
Well, I'm a big believer that people follow people.
Yeah. People follow people, yes.
Yeah, and I think certainly when you're the editor of a publication, you are
The
its
publication.
representative.
Yes, correct.
You know, you can't be separated. But
Yeah.
I think, you know, a lot of brands wonder about how they can harness their people. I mean, you have companies that have thousands of employees, every one of which could be an ambassador for you on LinkedIn, but they need to be empowered to be able to tell their own story. If they're just repeating company news, it's not very interesting. They need to be able to feel empowered to be articulate be able to articulate their own
Yeah.
stories and experience of working in that company.
Yes.
And I think uniquely in our part of the world, we need to really make them feel safe to do that, because
Yes.
putting your head above the parapet is
Yep.
not kind of what we do at this end of the world. And making yourself the kind of hero of the story
Yeah.
is not what we do. So I think there's definitely for marketers who are trying to get people to speak up, you got to make it safe. You got to give them permission. You got to maybe give them guidelines and validate them doing it and help them share. But that's interesting that in the publication, it's for the peak. When it's on LinkedIn, it's your experience of creating the story.
Yes.
Very cool.
But it's still for the publication. I am
Yes,
still
you're a
an
representative
ambassador.
of,
I'm
yeah.
still an ambassador for the publication. So I am very, very careful with what I put, because I know these things, right? Words have power, especially when it comes to CEOs, right? Words have power. So I am very careful to show only what they don't mind liking.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you straddle the fine line of is that obviously every leader that wants to, appear in the peak, or you want to appear in the peak, wants to put the best foot forward.
Yes.
Look great.
Yes.
You know that for it to be an interesting story, we need to find out something that perhaps you're not obviously keen to share. But if we go too hard, we might alienate you and not get
Correct.
you back. So it is a fine line to tread, and you've obviously honed your instincts over an entire career to do that. What might be your advice to brands and marketers about how do they get that balance right between not just putting out a happy joy press announcement, but also not sort of, exploiting the bad news or whatever? There's a line somewhere in the middle that's about right. How do you find that?
Okay, my advice to marketers would be to always find the connection. That connection that the brand will have with the audience is very important. Think about how we react or how we interact with brands in our personal life and use that as a strategy.
And have you done much in the realm of branded content?
I love branded content. I love writing branded content. I love writing branded content.
Okay, so you're open for branded content projects.
Always.
Okay.
And the reason why I love branded content is because I like to be told what to write.
Okay.
Yeah.
You find those parameters actually unleash your creativity?
Yes.
Because I'm a believer in that. I need a deadline. If you give me all the money in the world and all the time in the world, I tear my hair out.
Yeah. And I am not the kind of writer, right, who has so much ego in his writing. So previously, when I used to write branded content, right, and I give it to the client, my writers are so like, why are you so calm about all these changes? I'm like, it's okay. It's fine. Let them change. I'm not attached to my words. I'm not. But I understand what the brand wants, and I understand that other people in the company have other KPIs they need to follow, right? You need to make their job easier. You need to tell the story for them, but you also need to make their job easier. So don't be so egoistic. The best writers that I've had, right, are the writers who give me the stories, and this is not branded content, who give me the stories and tell me, Zat, do whatever you want with it.
I was once in a panel with a couple of screenwriters who'd sold a script to some producer, and then when the script eventually went to screen, it was a completely different movie.
Okay.
And someone in the audience put their hand up and said, aren't you pissed off that they took your baby and they ruined it? And they said, look, they paid us.
Yes.
It's their property now. It's like if I sell you a house and you redecorate, I've got no right to get pissed off. It's your house now. Same thing. So that was a good clarification for me.
But it's the thing, right? If the product that you send over to the buyer completely does not match what you have created, the question is this: why is there a mismatch? Was this something that you don't understand about the brief? Did you not communicate sufficiently with the buyer to make sure that the story is on track, that it is that we're all on the same page? What is that gap that needs to be plugged?
So what's the difference between a good brief and a bad brief from a brand that wants you to write something for them that has some sort of, that it's not an announcement, that has some sort of editorial approach or integrity to it? What's the difference between the good brief and the bad brief?
I think a good brief gives sufficient information, but also gives the emotion that you want people to get from the story. That emotive aspect, right, is what differentiates a editorial from a native story. So those editorials tend to be very cool. Like when we read editorials, we know it's an editorial. That we know part is the connection. It is the emotive aspect because we know that this brand is trying to push out a certain agenda, right? But
But every brand is, and that's fine. But I suppose it's the way you package it.
yes, so that packaging part, right, I think for me is where the authenticity comes in. So this authenticity comes with the understanding of how do you want your audience to feel. So what makes a good brief is a mixture of sufficient information. So I love when the briefs come to me, right, and they say, these are the 10 points that you can put into the story. We want the audience to feel this way.
Yeah, I think that second part's often missing.
Yeah.
You know, how do you want them to feel once they've read this
Correct.
and watched this
Yeah.
or interacted with this? So to go back to your, you know, when you're going to interview someone, do a profile of somebody, knowing that you're going in there, you're going to need, you're hoping the story is big enough to go across multiple channels. And as you said, sometimes you've got to be honest with yourself and say the story's not big enough to go across multiple channels. But if it is, and you're going in there trying to think of, okay, I need this for Instagram and this for whatever, do you go in sort of tooled up differently? Do you go in with different gear or different people? I mean, it used to just be writer and photographer. Does your iPhone come out now? How do you approach it differently to capture everything you need and be efficient?
Yes, I think equipment plays a part. I am very, you know, I work with a team, right, who is very professional, right? And they love their gears. Right? They love it.
We all like our toys, yeah.
Yeah. So there was once I asked my art director, why can't you just use an iPhone for this? We're gonna put this on Instagram. You know, it's okay to use iPhone. And they keep saying, oh, but because this one is personality, so I think we need to use like a professional camera. Then I said, we need to treat all personalities the same. So going into this, right, you have to remove the device from the story. The story will stand regardless of what device you use. But of course, sometimes you need a certain kind of device, right? Certain kind of group of people coming in. Most times when it comes to stories that are very wide, which I do in my previous application, I'm very specific with who they bring. Because certain producers cannot give me what I want. So I will tell them, you bring this person because this person knows storytelling better.
Yeah, so this is a bit of advice I often give to my customers is just because they've got one good writer or one good videographer or one good producer doesn't mean they can write all the different things or produce all different things. So when I'm doing video stuff, I've got a natural history guy and he loves nothing more than being dropped in the middle of the woods somewhere and find your way out, you know. But then I've also got my sort of luxury guy who needs, you know, his director's chair and his aircon and his lattes, right? They're both filmmakers, but they both do very, very different things. And I think a lot of my clients, they've got their guy and they try and get the same person to sort of do everything. That's not always the case. And sometimes, you know, it's the same with devices, you know, because you shot something one with that device, that's not necessarily the right tool for every job. So that's interesting to me that just because they're all called a producer doesn't mean they will produce the same type of content in the same way. And you can put the right person together with the right story.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice.
And I think as we move along in this very digital world, right, I feel like these cameras, for instance, all these cameras that we're using, they are great, right? But why can't they all be great phones? When I create my TikToks online, right, I only use the phone. Some of the best TikToks that I've done, right, are created with the worst lighting. Worst. Darkness, blur, worst. And those are the ones that do really, really well.
I think this is what confuses a lot of, and me too, you know, we're shooting this today on 3 absolutely beautiful cameras in a proper studio with great big lights and everything. And, you know, I like all the toys.
Yes.
And sometimes we get a bit caught up with the toys.
Yes.
I agree with that. But yeah, I think it still remains a mystery to some people. Like, why did that do so well when it looks so terrible?
Yeah.
But I think if the content has wit, or it has surprise, or it has story.
Yes.
I think so. I think you need more gadgets when the story is weak. You're trying to cover the lack of content with the stuff.
Yes, you look at the Diary of the CEO, the YouTube channel, the Diary of a CEO.
Oh, it's Stephen Bartlett. Yeah.
Yes. On the TikTok, it's very simple. It's a very simple frame. And it's just the CEOs dishing out all these beautiful things that they feel. And that's it. And people respond completely to it. We are moving away from the polish and the allure of Instagram. Instagram is about putting the best version of yourself. And people are moving away from that. Now we want authenticity. We want connection. We want to know, do you feel the same way as I do? Can we share the same room? And our feelings and emotions are both valid.
Which is very interesting because your magazine is beautifully polished,
Yeah.
but you're recognizing that your Instagram doesn't necessarily need to be the same.
Yes, it doesn't have to be the same. Yeah. And that is something
But
that
you
I'm
can still
working
be the
towards.
same brand.
Yes.
Oh, this is very
It should be different because the audience is different. I always tell people, the people who are on your Instagram, who discover you through Instagram, will never go to your website. Okay. So the question now is this: how do you keep them engaged? If your mind is always on the website, how are you going to create and keep the audience on your Instagram engaged? Because they came there specifically for that one post. Maybe they saw this one post that they really resonated with, therefore they like it, and then they start to follow you. But then if your posts after that, right, are not in the same vein, then you are not targeting your audience on that particular platform. Then you will lose them. You need to keep them there sufficiently until one day they decide, okay, you know what, I'm going to go and see the website.
So make your Instagrams for Instagram, your TikToks for
Yes.
TikTok, your LinkedIn updates for
Yes,
LinkedIn,
yeah.
and your articles for your magazine, and make sure they're serving the platform.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. Especially for the TikTok. Especially for the TikTok.
What's unique about TikTok?
TikTok is about TikTok is not about polish. TikTok is honestly it's about connection and authenticity. That's all. Don't try to put whatever you put on Instagram, copy and paste and put on your TikTok. I will know. And a lot of brands,
You're the sniffer dog of inauthenticity on TikTok.
a lot of brands do that. When I go, when I ask brands, right, I say, so what's the difference between your TikTok and your Instagram? Oh, it's the same. What's the difference between your Instagram and your YouTube Shorts? It's the same. Why? Do you have the same person following all your
Because
platforms?
they've got an app where you can press once and it will publish to all
Yes.
places.
Yeah,
and
but
then you
that
get all your
is-
analytics are nice and neat.
Yeah, but that is so lazy.
It's hard work to be popular. I'm going to bring this to a close. Let me ask you one more
Yes.
question, and then we'll bring it to close. I ask everyone this question, which is, I'm pretty convinced that, like me, you have a drawer full of stories you want to tell and have had the chance. What's the one story that you are desperate to tell that you haven't perhaps had the right opportunity to do so yet?
I really want to interview the country manager for Shein.
The Singapore country manager.
Yes.
Why?
I want to know what are his thoughts on what has happened to Shein online.
Oh.
And he is not a person from e-commerce. He came from non-e-commerce industries. And then now he is in this e-commerce business. He is literally inheriting all the problems, right, that came with Shein due to what people are talking about online. So I really, really want to ask him about it.
And what his plans are and how he's
Yeah, and how he is reacting to it. What are his views on environmental sustainability, about worker rights and things like that. Because as much as people hate on the brand, there are a lot of people who still love it, but they just forgive. They're like, it's okay. The price is good enough for me to forgive. Because at the end of the day, price is the most important.
We had a similar issue in the UK actually with a company there we have called Primark, which sells
yes.
super cheap
Yeah.
clothing.
Yeah.
And it was discovered. I'll have to just double confirm this so I don't get in
Yeah.
trouble. It was discovered that it wasn't necessarily all produced with the best practices.
Okay.
And they interviewed a lot of people, and I think people are so far from the harm that's caused, and everybody loves a bargain. And we had another interviewee today talk about how value for money is probably the most important thing to Singaporeans. Is they're looking for great value for money, they're looking for great bargains. So it's very, very hard to sort of get people to care when they're so far removed from it. And this is the thing with global supply chains. So I'm sure that would be a fascinating interview, and we'll tag him when this goes out.
Yes, please talk to me.
You're making an appeal down there. Talk to us. Zach, this has been fascinating. It's really good to hear, a full-time sort of journalist and content creator and editor tell or speak to brands about how you do it, because for you, content is the product. You're not trying to sell anything else. You're trying to make content so good, people will pay for it. And I think that's something that brands can aspire to. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for watching another episode of The Business of Storytelling. If you liked it, I hope you did. Please like, subscribe, share, tag us, comment, argue. I don't really mind what you do. I want to thank our sponsor, Vimeo. They're the platform for everything you need to make, manage, and share brilliant videos. So check out vimeo.com for their new enterprise solutions. And if you don't know, we're not just on Vimeo, we're available as an audio podcast on all the usual platforms where you can find that stuff. And you'll find us hovering around social media in various places as well. So thank you very much, and see you next time.